Hello and welcome to Virtualize Everything. Today we're going to be looking at installing Proxmox using ZFS. So at this point, you've made your flash drive, inserted it into your computer, set your boot options, and set virtualization. I'm not going to be showing you these steps as they're highly different between which computer you're using. So you're going to have to look at videos about what operating system you're using to create a bootable USB drive. And then you're going to have to research your BIOS a little bit to turn on virtualization and set boot orders. At this point, you can pick up with this tutorial. So here is your Proxmox installed. After you've turned on your computer and it's booted up, this will be the first screen you see. Now we have two choices here. Proxmox install with graphical user interface and install with terminal UI. And then we have an advanced option. We're not going to get into advanced options and we're not going to get into install with terminal UI. Today we're going to be using the graphical user install. So as long as that's highlighted still, you can go ahead and press enter. Pressing enter is going to start your installation tool. Now you're going to be granted with the UI. I suggest you go ahead and read this as it clearly defines what you can and cannot do with Proxmox, as well as anything that Proxmox can and cannot do with your data or what they offer for warranties. I've read it a couple of times, so I'm going to go ahead and press agree. Now the next option is going to be to select your target hard drive. And this is where we need to go a little bit outside of the standard course of installing software. A lot of times we get used to clicking next through most installations and we miss configuration steps. This is very true with Proxmox when you're trying to install with ZFS. So here we can select what drive we're using and you can notice that we have a singular 100 gig hard drive in here. Now this isn't going to be great for ZFS, as most cases ZFS requires 2 or more hard drives. But let's go ahead, we'll press options here, and then you get this choice. Now you can set different swap sizes, free space, root sizes, and whatnot here inside of this tool for configuration of our Proxmox system. What we're really interested in here is file system. ext4 is going to install your standard Proxmox LVM type installation. If we click on the drop down, we also get XFS, a few different ZFS options, and ButterFS. ButterFS we'll get into in a future video. We're really interested in is these ZFS options. Since we have a single hard drive, we can either choose ZFS RAID 0 or ZFS RAID 1. And in just a minute here, I'll explain to you more what all of these types go. But let's just say we're choosing ZFS RAID 0 here today, and then we can select our hard drives. Since we only have one hard drive, we'll select the one hard drive we have. Let's go off to a PowerPoint presentation that I've set up for you and learn about what all these different ZFS types are here in Proxmox. So there's 6 different types of ZFS that are available to us in Proxmox, and we're going to go ahead, list them out here, and kind of talk about how many drives are required for them, whether or not you need the same drive. And if you kind of remember some of the logic behind RAID, it was supposed to be a random array of disks or random array of inexpensive disks, and they were supposed to be able to be different sizes and work together and whatnot. ZFS, although it creates what I like to call a quasi RAID, because a lot of times they have to be the same size to function and stuff, it does create a RAID in software in kind of a way, and Proxmox actually labels ZFS as RAIDs. So we're going to start out with the first ZFS option, which Proxmox also calls RAID 0, which is basically stripe. And what that means is it's going to start out with one disk, it's going to write to those disks, then it's going to fill that disk up, and it's going to go on to that disk. So you basically merge all all these disks together. It writes pieces of data to both disks until it fills them up. It provides the maximum amount of read-write performance, but there's no data redundancy or protection against disk failures. In Proxmox, you only need to have one drive to do this, and it's not affected by having different size disks. It's just going to write to them as needed. Now we're going to get into some more complex versions of RAID, but let's go to RAID 1. RAID 1 is going to basically do what RAID 0 does, but in reverse. So instead of using all of the data as write space, it's going to use half the data as backup space. So it offers the maximum amount of redundancy. So if you have one write disk, you have one backup disk. You are required to have two drives because you need to back up the disk that you have. And it is recommended that they're the same size. If you have different size disks, it's going to give you the space availability of the disk that is the smallest. ZFS RAID 10 is going to combine both RAID 0 and RAID 1. So it's going to give you the performance increases of striping with the reliability of mirrored. The minimum drives that are really required on this is 4, 2 to stripe 2 to mirror the striped disks. This starts to add some of the redundancy and fault tolerance as well as disk loss protection that ZFS and RAID is still known for. You are going to have the disk size limitations. They are strongly recommended to be matched in pairs. So if you have two 1 terabytes and two 500 gigs, you're going to put the 500 gig and the 1 terabyte as both a RAID or both a stripe and mirrored pair. So RAID 10 is a lot of times what people use. It gives you the most amount of protection with the most amount of fault tolerance. There are versions of RAID that are going to help you balance more fault tolerance, but RAID 10 is going to start to introduce that fault tolerance to you. RAID-1 offers redundancy similar to RAID 5, allowing for failure of one disk without data loss. It requires a minimum of 3 disks. So RAID-1 basically is going to have one data disk with 2 backup disks. This means if one of these 3 disks fail, you're going to be able to replace that disk with another disk and continue on. Again, it's suggested that all 3 disks are the same size for obvious reasons that we've explained in the previous versions of ZFS RAID. RAID-2 is going to allow 2 simultaneous disk failures. Again, it's recommended that we have them all be the same size. So 2 disks here can fail. We're required to have 4 disks, and that's basically 1 disk to 3 disks, kind of similar setup to RAID 1, where we're adding sequentially more backup drives to primary drives so that we have data duplicated more times inside of this server. Now, this isn't going to protect you, say you have a power surge or something and you fry all of your disk electronics. RAID ZFS isn't considered to be a backup technology. So it's not going to replace your offsite backups. It's not going to replace your backup drives that you back up your stuff to. What it's going to do is allow you to have a higher percentage of uptime. And it's really the reason why I don't particularly suggest people go with these super complex RAID setups for their home lab. In business, in production, it's great. But I feel, at least on the budget side, I mean, if you have a big budget, it's a little bit different. But at least on the small budget size, it's really probably more beneficial as far as data loss to make sure that you have the backup on-site and the backup off-site before you worry about really protecting your data inside of your server. And my personal servers, I usually set them all up as LVM. LVM allows me to add data to my pool. It doesn't necessarily give me any performance increases like striping, but it also protects me against some of that data failure that could happen in striping. If I have a drive fail in LVM, it's going to fail. I'm going to lose all the data on it. Hopefully I have everything backed up, and my backup schema should protect me against that. But that being said, that system's down until I recover my backups, replace that storage space, and fire it back up. The last option here is going to be RAID-3, which is a minimum of 5 drives. They all have to be the same size, or is recommended to be the same size, and this will allow for 3 disk failures. Again, great for a production environment, really probably has no place in your average home lab unless you really just want to show off to your friends or you're worried about data protection. I mean, wedding photos, that type of stuff. And I feel that even then, like power surges and other things, floods, things that could wipe out your entire system and all of your disks, you're better off having your offsite backup and your on-site backup. My opinions. Let's get back to this installation video and continue on with installing Proxmox using ZFS. Back here at the Proxmox installer, we have now learned what all of these different ZFS RAID options are, and we have decided that we're going to use RAID 0. RAID 0 is going to allow us to accommodate for our singular drive, and later on, if we get an extra drive, just like we showed in our previous video, we can add drives to it because we're already set up with ZFS. This is going to allow our system to operate like another system and also have that added storage. So if we reinstalled this, if we changed hard drives, if we move this back up somewhere else, it's going to be a sleek and easy deployment. Just like if we put this into a cluster, we'll be able to easily move this to another Proxmox server because it's not going to be dependent on different storage options. It's all going to use our initial local ZFS install. Let's go ahead and hit OK at this point, and then we can press next and really move through this installer at a decent pace, just like we would any other install of Proxmox using LVM. So we'll select our country that we're in or our city since we're here in America. So we can scroll down here, we can find New York. We're going to use US English. This is going to help deploy our time zone. Pressing next, we're going to enter our password, enter our email address or lack thereof. This can be changed later on to configure notifications. Pressing next, we're going to configure our network options and what it's going to be called. My network is local, so I'll change .LAN to local for host names. If I need to change any IP addresses, I can go ahead and do so right now, as well as pay attention to my CIDR notation, gateways, and DNS servers. Once we fill out that information, we can go ahead and press next, look at our values, and press install. At this point, Proxmox will install, and when this finishes, we're going to go ahead and reboot into the Proxmox command line environment and interact with Proxmox primarily through the web interface unless you choose to use the command line for some reason. Okay, so our Proxmox server has rebooted and we're here at the command line. We need to take note of the IP address here, or rather the URL for visiting the web interface, and we really need to pay attention to the HTTPS as well as what's after this colon, which is the port number of 8006. If we don't enter those options correctly, we're not going to get a web interface for interacting with our Proxmox server. So let's go ahead and move to a web browser and take a look at what the web interface looks like here that we've installed with ZFS. So upon someone visiting Proxmox for the first time and every so often afterwards, you're going to be granted with a screen like this. Here, using Brave browser or most other browsers that are Chromium based, we're going to go ahead, press Advance, and say proceed to this IP address. It's unsafe. What this is telling you is that it's using an SSL certificate, but this SSL certificate is not trusted by the computer. And it just means that somebody like Let's Encrypt didn't sign this SSL certificate. It was signed by the server. Once we tell it to proceed, we can go ahead and log in. Our first login will be with root and then the password that we set up in the installer. Now we're going to be granted with a warning telling us that we don't have a valid subscription for this Proxmox server. This hasn't been so persistent in the past, but I've been noticing that it's getting more persistent. Unfortunately, if you're using Proxmox in your home lab, which most of my tutorials are geared towards, you're going to just have to put up with this, but there's a way to at least get updates. So let's hit OK and do what I plan to show you really as the last step in this tutorial and go get the updates, and then I'll show you kind of how the ZFS install differs in the web interface from the LVM install, and it's really pretty simple. It's just some terminology, and then I'll explain to you one of the last reasons why you may not want to use ZFS in your home lab. And I know I've kind of said a few times I don't suggest it and I don't use it, and why you may not want to. It's not that it isn't a good technology. It's that my belief is home labbing for most people is done on a budget. So to get these updates, we're going to go ahead, select PVE or our node here under data center. We're going to go to repositories. We're going to take both of these repositories here that say PVE Enterprise and Enterprise, and we're going to disable them by highlighting them and going to disable. This will stop us from getting the error messages when we do our updates or run our apt update. Then we're going to hit add. We're going to get this warning message again, hit OK, and here under repositories we'll click on the drop down and we'll choose no subscription. What no subscription is going to give us is less tested updates for non-production. So basically we're going to be in some way providing our services for testing updates to Proxmox before they're pushed to enterprise or subscription customers. So let's go ahead and press add. The updates have been added. There's also, if you hit add and you're planning to use Ceph, a no subscription option for Ceph. At this point, we can hit reload. I don't know if you need to, but I've always done so. And then we can go to update and press refresh. Click OK again on the warning message that we don't have a valid subscription. And we can go ahead and do our update, find out how many packages we need. It just tells us to ask OK. Once we close this screen, it'll refresh and it'll show us all of the available updates that we need to run. Now, if this was going to be my system and I was going to keep it on and it wasn't just for the demo of this video, I would go ahead and hit upgrade. I'd get this output saying that I had 85 to go. I'd press Y and enter and it would install all of these updates onto my system. I'm going to close this window out and then I'm going to hit this caret here under PVE, and I'm also going to go to summary. So here with the caret down, we can take and see that local ZFS on this web interface right here is called local and then ZFS. On a traditional standard install of Proxmox, like here on the system that I'm demoing, it's called local LVM. That is the main difference between interacting with ZFS and LVM systems. Now, the last quote unquote drawback that I feel is kind of harder to demonstrate here because I have a bunch of stuff running on my system. So my RAM usage, of course, is going to be higher, but you can notice that RAM usage on a Proxmox system here here, if we hit summary, will be higher if you have ZFS. And I can't remember where I read it, but I did read maybe a year or so ago that you're suggested to have a minimum of 8 gigs of RAM when using ZFS, and that you should expect for ZFS to take half of your available RAM for disk management and write activities. I haven't used ZFS a lot, but that was one of my large factors for kind of turning away from ZFS, other than the fact that I felt standard backup options were a better use of my budget than using ZFS in my system. That is my personal choice and personal opinion. Please research them before you choose to do the same. I know that they look at YouTubers and people that make videos like this as influencers. I'm not trying to influence you in either way, whether to use LVM or ZFS. ZFS is a superior technology. I can see its use cases inside of the home lab. For my particular beliefs and budget, I don't feel necessarily that it's required. With that, I'm going to conclude this video. Thank you for watching. If you've made it all the way to the end here with my multiple rants and explanations, and consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to Virtualize Everything to learn more about Proxmox and virtualization in general. As always, have a good night.